friends, welcome to the channel. And firstly, I want to start by thanking everyone who's continued to be with us in this journey, whether supporting us by subscribing, commenting, or liking some of our videos. And those on LinkedIn who've read the articles that we've written extensively about the travel to date. I think I spoke in my previous video, I spoke about the beauty of Graaff-Reinet. And today it's an opportunity for me to really revisit one of the major reasons why I did come to Graaff-Reinet. Graaff-Reinet has the honor of having produced a lot of leaders for South Africa, all the way from the great track to the modern day South Africa. So for me, it has the honor of producing my personal hero. Those who know me know how much I love Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. And I think he was a really amazing leader. And today I want to share his lifelong lesson, something that I try my best to emulate in the way I lead my life, in the way I try and be a leader. The story of Robert Sobukwe is well documented. And for those who are not aware, Robert Sobukwe was actually sentenced to 3 years in prison, but ended up spending most of his life in some sort of imprisonment without a real trial, a real outcome. And he spent quite a bulk of his life in Robben Island, secluded from other prisoners in his own separate accommodation. If you go to Robben Island today, you can visit a place called the Sobukwe House, where he spent a lot of his time. And I think that one of the greatest things that really troubled Sobukwe and the sacrifice that he gave with his family. And if you read the letters to his wife, to his children during his imprisonment, you could see the cry of a man who recognizes the great price he has paid, but unfortunately the price that his wife and children also had to pay, to liberate this country, to emancipate the African man and woman. And I think for me, that's something that we owe Robert Sobukwe. But what I wanted to do today wasn't only to talk about the political history of South Africa or the history of Sobukwe, but for me it's about what are the leadership lessons we can take from Sobukwe. I really want to talk to you about these 3 principles and what they mean for you as a leader. What are the things you could do in your daily lives to make sure that you contribute, you strengthen your ability to become a responsible leader? To tell the story of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, and also to do it justice, I can't help by starting with the quote of something he said just before he was sentenced in 1960. And this was a paraphrase quote of another poet. But I think these words remind us what he stood for and what he was prepared to die for. Just before Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was sentenced, he said these words. He said, "There's no doubt in my mind that I'm leaving this court with a stronger faith in my cause than ever before. There's no doubt in my mind that the struggle for the emancipation of the African people will be won. There's no doubt in my mind that I may be imprisoned, I may be killed. But how can a man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?" This is a really, really powerful quote. And here, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was quoting Horatius by Thomas Babington Macaulay. And I want to share a paragraph from that poem. It says, "Then outspake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing the fearful odds for the ashes of his father and the templets of his God?" It's a really powerful quote that I think, I always try and remember this poem, but I think Robert said it even better. Friends, for me, when Robert Sobukwe said these words, he wasn't just trying to be poetic. I think he was trying to explain to us what it means to be a responsible leader. And I think we can all agree that in the society we live in today, we are in need of more responsible leaders. And I think there are really 3 key principles that Robert Sobukwe espoused, and I think this poem was talking to. I think first is responsible leadership isn't based on title. Secondly, it is rooted in value and service. And finally, it is based on the willingness to sacrifice for a greater good. And I think for me, if you want to be a responsible leader, these are the 3 things that we can learn from the way Robert Sobukwe lived his life and engaged, and the legacies left in this country. I think Sobukwe reminds us that responsible leadership is about foregoing personal gain. And my friend, if you are willing to die for your next bonus, your next share issue, your next title, you are not living responsible leadership. I think we need to find a way to really be clear on how do we put our principles ahead of personal gain. What can you do to test if you're living your course, if you're living your truth? I think for me, there are really two key important questions you should ask yourself every day. It's really around what are the key principles I'm willing to die for, I'm willing to sacrifice for, I'm willing to lose for. Secondly, are those principles visible or appreciated and actually felt by the people you are leading? A lot of us leaders have principles, but actually we only practice them back at home. At work, we forget them, and even when we articulate them, people around us don't experience them. They doubt that we live for those. And I think for me, those are two key questions. What are the key principles that you are willing to die or sacrifice for? And secondly, are those principles visible to the people you are leading? Are they feeling them? Are they recognizing those principles in you? The second principle is, how do you view your life, your career? Do you view it as a continuation of a long historical chapter, or as a unique story only for yourself? And I think when Sobukwe talks about, willing to sacrifice for the ashes of your forefathers or of your gods, he talks to this. He says, our lives are a continuation. Do you acknowledge the moral, commercial, political, inheritance you received? When you're a CEO of a company, you didn't start. And this company's been around for 50 years. Do you see your tenure as a CEO as a unique chapter of how great you're going to be, or a continuation and the responsibility to honor and evolve this long history of people who came before you, who bestowed you this inheritance? The inheritance of the size of a company you have, the history of the company, of your company. That's the questions you have to ask yourselves. And I think for me, the question you have to ask ourselves as leaders is, am I firstly acknowledging the history? Am I showing appreciation for the inheritance of my forefathers? And am I evolving it? Or I'm so determined to create my own unique book and not continue this beautiful story that I've inherited. And I think I see it a lot. So if you think of the political history of South Africa and the history of your own company, how are your leaders behaving? How are you behaving? Are you behaving like you're part of this long history of this organization? Or you're a unique book? You're writing your own book, and you forget that you have inherited this, and your job is not just to honor but to evolve it. So that's my challenge to you guys, and those are the two questions you have to ask yourself. Am I honoring the history or the inheritance that my forefathers have given me? Secondly, how am I evolving it? Because we have a responsibility not just to recognize the inheritance, but to evolve it. And I think that's where we can make a real difference as leader, by involving the inheritance of the organization we've been bestowed and entrusted to lead. Finally, Sobukwe talks about the fearful odds. Now, the third principle it's really a question, is what are you doing today to prepare yourself and others to face these fearful odds? Because invariably, in anything in life, you will face the fearful odds. So think of market collapse, market share losses, stock price tanking, talent leaving your company, or your marriage falling apart, or your relationship with the children falling apart. I think in life, we have to prepare ourselves. And as leaders, we have the responsibility to prepare others. And I think for me, that's something that I'm challenging all of you. Are you preparing your team? Are you preparing yourself to face these fearful odds? Think of it this way. When the tough time, which invariably they will come, your people are going to look up to you for courage. And trust me, my friends, courage cannot be faked in the moment. People will only have courage, will only glean or really draw courage from you because over the years you've demonstrated good leadership, strength, faithfulness, and trustworthiness. So people will look at your history before they draw courage from you. And if your history doesn't demonstrate that you're a leader that they can draw courage from, the deck is going to fall apart. So I think the final principle is really around taking responsibility for our own personal development, taking responsibility to make ourselves better, to improve ourselves, but not just ourselves, but also the people around us. So think of it this way. When you leave your role, are you leaving a better team or a worse team? And for me, that's always been the mark of how I judge a great leader, is when you leave, is your team falling apart because actually you only focus on developing and strengthening and preparing yourself and not your broader team. So those are the 3 principles that I want you to think about. Friends, I think what we learn from Sobukwe's legacy is a leader will not be judged by how well he did in the good times, how they stood in comfort, but they'll be judged how they did, how they stand up in tough times. You know, the question of legacy isn't about how well did I do. It's about how well did I stand up against tough times, or even how did I fail better when I couldn't succeed. And I think that's the question we should all ask ourselves. You know, for me, it's a question I've been wrestling all my life, is this question of how can a man die better? And I think for me, can die better by being responsible as a human. Secondly, responsible as a leader in whatever facet of your life is. Because every one of us is not going to succeed in everything we do. We're going to fail. So when we fail, let's fail better. And we can't live forever. So when we die, let's die better. Let's die facing or honoring the ashes of our forefathers and honoring our gods. With those few words, guys, I want to say thank you very much. Thank you for the support. Hope to see you again in my next stop, and hopefully you found value in this. So thank you very much.